I only learned much later about the precarious circumstances surrounding my birth. My mom once confided in me that when she discovered she was pregnant with me, there was real worry about whether they could manage the financial burden of raising a child. At that time, my dad was earning very little and they were just scraping by. However, everything changed when my grandparents learned about the pregnancy. Far from being concerned, they were ecstatic. They generously offered my parents their own house, a lovely place in a desirable neighborhood, close to an excellent school. They also pledged ongoing financial support. Born into that warm, welcoming house, my early years were filled with joy. My grandparents were a constant presence in my life, taking on daily duties like dropping me off and picking me up from school, and treating me to after-school ice cream or park visits. Those early days were some of the happiest of my life. However, a stark shift occurred one night that is etched permanently in my memory. I was supposed to be asleep, but I was jolted awake by the sound of my parents shouting. I couldn't grasp all the words, but phrases like betrayal and how could you reached my ears. The climax of the fight was marked by the slamming of the front door. Peering out my window, I saw my dad stumbling towards his car, a whiskey bottle in hand. The sound of screeching tires was the last I heard from him. The following morning, the grim news of his fatal car accident was delivered by 4 police officers at our doorstep, which left my mother devastated. The funeral is a blur in my memory, dominated by the sight of my father in a coffin and the pervasive sound of crying. My grandparents' faces, wet with tears as they held me close, are a vivid memory from that day. Life changed rapidly after that. My mom seemed to recover startlingly quickly, and within a few months, she had remarried and was expecting another child. She told me excitedly that I was going to have a little sister named Eliana. While she was thrilled, I felt a whirlwind of emotions. Everything was changing too quickly, and I deeply missed my dad and my grandparents. As time passed, visits from my grandparents dwindled until they stopped altogether. Confused and missing them, I asked my mom why they no longer visited. Her expression hardened as she told me they had cut ties with us because she had started a new family. But she softened as she reminded me that we still had the house and their financial help for my education, something we should be grateful for. My sister Eliana was born prematurely, and though Mom explained it as just one of those things, even as a young child, I sensed there was more to the story. Meanwhile, my new stepfather, Daniel, made no secret of his disdain for me, often glaring at me across the dinner table. Life had shifted from a tale of joy and support to one of complexity and silent battles at home, marking a profound shift from the idyllic early days with my grandparents. Growing up, my father was a difficult man with a short temper, and our interactions were often strained. At dinner, when he'd snap irritably, "I'm trying to eat in peace," my mother would hastily intervene, suggesting gently, "Eliana, sweetheart, why don't you take your meal to your room? I'll bring it to you there." Over time, these episodes increased, signaling that even the smallest things could provoke him, and sadly, I was often the target. Whenever we were alone, he'd belittle me with harsh words, his face contorted with disdain as he labeled me a freeloader and a burden. These encounters always left me silently holding back tears, feeling powerless. My father's demeanor starkly contrasted when it came to my sister. He was always cheerful and doting towards her. He would playfully lift her onto his knee, spoil her with presents, and speak in a sweet tone that always seemed to unsettle me. His pet name for her, my little angel, accompanied by promises of surprises, only emphasized the disparity in how he treated us. In her desperation to keep the peace and placate him, my mother found ways to keep me out of sight. She would usher me to my room, locking the door behind her whenever he arrived home. Isolated, I listened to the distant sounds of laughter and chatter, feeling excluded from what should have been my family circle. I couldn't comprehend why I was relegated to eating alone, or why I felt like an outsider in my own home. As I grew older, the isolation only deepened. I was excluded from family vacations and gatherings at relatives' homes. Even when guests visited, I was instructed to remain in my room, silent and out of sight to avoid any disruption. My mother, her eyes filled with a pleading look, would remind me, "We don't want to upset him." You know how he gets. And I did know all too well the angry outbursts and the turmoil that followed his temper. With each passing year, I retreated further into myself, becoming shy and withdrawn. School became a quiet sanctuary where I barely interacted with others. However, in the solitude of my room, my imagination became my refuge. I crafted elaborate stories and grand adventures where I was the hero, cherished and celebrated. On my 18th birthday, an unexpected opportunity changed my life. Having honed my skills on the internet, I discovered an online editorial director seeking new voices in children's and young adult literature. On a whim, I submitted some of my stories and, to my astonishment, they were a hit. Suddenly, I was collaborating on projects, writing stories, and even helping develop educational apps for young people. For the first time, I felt a sense of pride and accomplishment. My work was not only recognized, but loved. I was making my own money and saving every penny. Through my writing, I found a sense of belonging and purpose, a stark contrast to the invisibility I felt at home. My stories, once a private escape, had opened the door to a new, empowering chapter of my life. Watching my bank account grow was thrilling in a way I had never experienced. One day, feeling particularly courageous after a large deposit, I decided to share the news of my financial success with my mother. We were alone in the kitchen. My stepfather Daniel was away on a flatbed driver job, and my sister was out visiting a friend. "Mom," I began, my voice trembling slightly, "I have something to tell you. I've been working with a publishing house writing stories, and I'm actually making quite good money now." Mom's eyes lit up. "Really? Oh, Eliana, that's wonderful. I always knew you were a smart girl," she said. Her rare praise warmed my heart, but then her face took on a calculating look. She leaned in closer, her tone shifting. "This is actually perfect timing. We've been facing some financial troubles lately." My heart sank as she continued. "This house is so big, and upkeep isn't cheap. Plus, raising you hasn't been cheap either. We've been exhausted trying to provide for you all these years." I felt as if I'd been punched. I had always felt more like an outsider than a family member. How could I have been such a burden? "Remember that college fund we set up for you?" she continued, avoiding my gaze. "Well, we had to dip into that for the house. But now that you're earning, you can support yourself, right?" I nodded, too shocked to speak. "That's my girl," she said, patting my hand. "Oh, and one more thing. Daniel, and I think it's time for you to move out after you graduate. We're turning your room into a space for your sister. She needs more room." I stared at her in disbelief. "Move out? But where will I go?" Mom shrugged dismissively and turned away. "You're a smart girl, Eliana. You'll figure it out. You've got some savings now, right?" See? As she left the kitchen, the magnitude of her words crashed over me. I was being ousted from my home. The funds I thought would pay for college were gone, and it seemed my own mother was indifferent to my fate. The months until graduation passed in a haze of anxiety and frantic planning. By day, I focused on finishing high school with strong grades. By night, I poured myself into my writing, scrimping and saving every dime. Yet no matter how I adjusted my budgets, the costs for college, tuition, living expenses, books, were overwhelming. I attempted once more to discuss college with my mother, hoping for some understanding. "Mom, I've been looking at college costs, and She cut me off. "Eliana, we've already discussed this. You're on your own now. You'll figure it out." Graduation day came and went without the sense of pride I should have felt. The following morning, my mother appeared at my door with a couple of cardboard boxes, her tone eerily cheerful. "Time to pack up, Eliana," she announced. "Your sister needs the space." As I packed, the realization that I was truly on my own sank in. My dreams of further education seemed more distant than ever, and I knew that from now on, it was up to me to shape my future. Overflowing with excitement about her new room, I packed my belongings into boxes, trying to hold back tears as I finished. When everything was ready, my mom assisted me in moving them to the front door. Standing on the porch, surrounded by my few possessions, my mom gave me a brief, awkward hug. "Good luck out there," she said before the door shut behind her. I lingered for a moment, stunned, then took a deep breath, picked up my boxes, and walked away from the only home I'd ever known. With my limited funds, I managed to secure a small studio apartment in a less desirable part of town. The frequent sirens were disruptive at night, but the space was mine. Deciding to delay college for a year due to financial constraints, I focused on finding work. I reached out to my contacts at a publishing house, pleading for any available work. To my relief, they were eager to offer me more opportunities. "We've been impressed with your work, Eliana," my freelance editor said. "How would you feel about writing some children's books for us?" I embraced the chance eagerly. Soon, I was immersed in writing and illustrating, working tirelessly. The job was challenging but fulfilling, and for the first time, I felt a sense of purpose. Living alone was tough, but I adapted, learning to manage my finances, cook simple meals, and navigate public transport. I also made some friends in my building, other young people striving for independence. However, despite my efforts, saving for college seemed like a far-off goal, with every small financial gain offset by unexpected expenses like apartment repairs, tech malfunctions, or health issues. A year after leaving, I received an unexpected call from a number I thought I'd never see again, my mother's. Her voice was unusually cheerful. "Eliana, sweetie, how are you? I've missed you so much. Why don't you come visit us this weekend?" Skeptical but curious, I agreed to the visit, packing with a mix of hope and apprehension. Upon arrival, my mom's exaggerated affection felt forced, as if she were a poor actress in a play. "Oh, Eliana," she exclaimed, "you must be exhausted from your journey. Why don't you sleep in your sister's room tonight? She can stay in the guest room." My sister, now a teenager, rolled her eyes but didn't object. The next morning, the sound of familiar voices drew me downstairs to the kitchen, where I froze in the doorway. There at the table sat my grandparents, whom I hadn't seen in years. "Eliana, oh look how you've grown," my grandmother exclaimed with joy. As they shared their plans to move to a nursing home, my grandfather's voice trembled with emotion. They wanted to connect and share some time with us before they left, a sentiment that made the room feel warmer, bridging the distance the years had imposed. "You're really thriving, aren't you?" Grandma interjected, her voice eager. "Do tell us all about your university. What's your major, dear?" I hesitated, unsure of how to respond, when my mother quickly filled the silence. "Eliana is excelling at school. She's at the top of her class, as always," she announced with a smile. I was taken aback by how naturally the falsehoods rolled off her tongue. My grandparents beamed with pride, though their curious gazes suggested they had more questions. "That's fantastic," Grandma exclaimed. "Could we perhaps speak with Eliana alone for a while? We'd love to catch up." A flicker of panic crossed my mother's face. "Oh, I don't think that's necessary. Eliana's quite busy, aren't you, dear? In fact, we should probably start wrapping this visit up," she added hastily, diverting the conversation to other matters and hardly giving me a chance to speak. As the visit concluded, Grandma discreetly squeezed my arm and slipped me a business card. Once they were gone, my mother's demeanor shifted instantly, her warm smile replaced by a stark, indifferent look that I knew all too well. "Well, that's over," she remarked as she began to clear the table briskly. "You should probably head home now, Eliana. I'm sure you have things to do." Standing in the doorway, the business card felt like it was burning a hole in my pocket as my mother ushered me out. The warmth and affection from moments before were replaced by the familiar chill of detachment. Back in my modest apartment, I finally pulled out the business card with trembling fingers and dialed the number, my heart thumping. "Hello," came my grandmother's warm, familiar voice. "Grandma, it's Eliana," I whispered, barely holding back my emotions. We talked for a long time, her voice a comforting blend of joy and concern. Before long, we had arranged for her and Grandpa to visit me at my place the next day. Excited yet anxious, I gave them my address and then threw myself into preparing my apartment. I cleaned every nook and cranny, organized my few possessions, and even found a vase for some fresh flowers I picked up from the local store. Sleep eluded me that night as I busied myself in the small kitchen, preparing lunch for the following day and baking Grandma's favorite snickerdoodle cookies from a recipe I found online. Morning arrived too quickly. I was just pulling the last batch of cookies from the oven when I heard a knock. Taking a deep breath, I smoothed down my shirt and opened the door. There stood Grandma and Grandpa, a mix of emotions crossing their faces. After a moment of silent reunion, Grandma stepped forward and hugged me tightly. "Oh, Eliana," she whispered emotionally. "Look at you, all grown up." As I welcomed them into my small apartment, their eyes widened slightly as they took in the modest space, but their smiles told me they were just happy to be here, with me. Grandpa spoke slowly, his face filled with confusion. "Eliana, why are you here? Your mother told us you were still living in the old house." Before I could clarify, they began to unravel a story that would completely alter my understanding of my past. "We've always wanted to be a part of your life," Grandma said, tears welling up in her eyes. "But your mother, she kept us apart." They revealed the tragic evening my father died, exposing secrets that shook me. My mother had been unfaithful and was already expecting my sister when my father discovered the betrayal. Heartbroken, he had decided on a divorce, but then a fatal accident claimed his life. As I absorbed their words, they explained that the home I had grown up in, where Mom and her new partner, Daniel, still resided, legally belonged to me, bequeathed in my father's will. "We've sent money for your upbringing every month," Grandma disclosed as she took my hand. "When you graduated, we even increased the amount, thinking you needed it for college." The revelations spun around me. All my struggles to make ends meet, yet there had been funds and a property in my name all along. "We just wanted to ensure you were comfortable and everything at the house was fine," Grandpa added, explaining their unexpected visit the day before. Overwhelmed, I confronted a flurry of emotions, anger, betrayal, and sorrow for the lost joys of my childhood. "I don't understand," I faltered. "All this time, there was money, a house in my name." Grandma tightened her grip on my hand. "Tell us everything, Eliana. We need to know what really happened." So, I poured out my story. I spoke of a lonely childhood, confined and hidden away, and of Daniel's hostility that made me feel like an unwelcome burden. I revealed how the funds meant for my education had been seized, how I was expelled from the home with little more than a few boxes of personal items. "I've been scraping by," I confessed, my voice cracking, writing children's books from this tiny apartment, saving pennies for college. As my tale unfolded, shock turned to fury on my grandparents' faces. Grandpa's complexion reddened, his fists balled in anger. "This is unacceptable," he seethed. "What your mother has done, it's theft, it's abuse. We're going to make this right, Eliana. I promise you that." True to their promise, my grandparents wasted no time. They retained a top lawyer, and together we embarked on a legal battle to reclaim what was rightfully mine. The courtroom drama was intense. Mom and Daniel painted me as a wayward, ungrateful child, but the overwhelming evidence, bank records and testimonies from neighbors about my seclusion, swayed the judge. Justice ruled in my favor. Mom and Daniel were evicted from my property, and the court ordered that the misappropriated maintenance funds be repaid to me in full. Leaving the courthouse, I felt a bittersweet mix of vindication and sorrow. Yes, I had won, but at the cost of severing ties with the only family I had known, as dysfunctional as it had been. Yet a new chapter was beginning. Grandma and Grandpa were committed to rectifying the years we lost. They helped me move into my rightful home and supported me as I selected a college nearby the nursing home where they planned to move. Being close to them felt right after everything that had transpired. For the first time in a long while, life seemed almost perfect. Growing up, I often visited my grandparents, basking in their love and wisdom. We spent countless hours playing chess, watching classic films, and engaging in deep conversations. They shared stories about my father, helping to piece together the scattered fragments of my own history. However, I was learning that life could be simultaneously generous and ruthless. Just when I was starting to settle into this newfound joy with my grandparents, tragedy struck. My grandfather passed away suddenly from a heart attack, and my grandmother followed him just 3 months later. The doctors claimed it was natural causes, but I knew the heartbreaking truth. She had lost her will to live without him. Once again, I found myself alone, engulfed in grief. Having only just reconnected with them, I was just beginning to heal the wounds of my past. With their loss, I immersed myself in my studies, trying to find solace in academia, but the void was palpable every holiday and milestone I couldn't share with them. As years passed, life found a new rhythm. I graduated from college with honors and landed a prestigious job at a publishing house, the very one that had given me my first break as a teenager. With the inheritance from my grandparents, I bought a cozy apartment near my workplace, a place I could truly call my own. My financial situation improved significantly. I rented out my grandparents' house and my childhood home, which provided a steady income stream. For the first time, I felt secure, stable, and, most importantly, happy. I had a circle of friends, a fulfilling career, and a peace I had never known before. However, life always has its surprises. One Sunday afternoon, an unfamiliar number appeared on my phone, but I immediately recognized it. It was my mother's. With a mix of curiosity and apprehension, I answered. Her voice was unnaturally sweet, oozing with feigned affection. She quickly delved into a sob story about my pregnant sister, who had been abandoned by her husband. They were all crammed into a tiny apartment. My mother, her boyfriend Daniel, and my sister. They were desperate. My mother alternated between begging and crying, employing her old manipulative tactics. As she spoke, painful memories resurfaced. The lonely nights locked in my room, the years of neglect and emotional abuse, the day she kicked me out with nothing but a few boxes. She pleaded for help, claiming we were family. I responded coldly, questioning her notion of family, reminding her of her past actions. She tried to argue that it was all in the past, but I countered that the effects were present and real. She was only reaching out because she needed something as always. I advised her to resolve her own problems, echoing the harsh advice she gave me when she abandoned me. I firmly wished her luck, echoing her own dismissive words from years ago, and hung up. As I blocked her number, a tremor ran through my hand, but a sense of liberation followed. For years, I had carried the burden of her neglect.